Hello, everybody. Welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. I've got a special guest here today, Malcolm Collins, who I've watched a lot of his videos, and I brought him on because I get a lot of questions about birth rate and demographics and how it affects the economy. I did a video several years ago called Debunking the Doom on over and underpopulation, but it's been a while and a lot has changed since then. And I want to bring on Malcolm to kind of discuss a lot of these topics. The first one.
Hello, I am excited to be here, Nick. Very, very. No, and there's a lot to be talking about within, when I'm trying to project the future of an economy. My background, Stanford MBA, used to work in venture capital, have worked in private equity. I regularly advise major VC firms. So this is a space that I am actively engaged in. And I would often tell people, as we go into this discussion, I'd be focused a lot more on the short-term economic world, on the way AI is going to change things, than on the way falling demographics is going to change things.
Well, I think AI is huge.
That I use called Descript.
The first question, I want to bring it back to the pronatalist side of things. How much of the birth rate problem is economic versus cultural? I kind of come from a more perspective of that this is an economic thing. The high cost of housing and education, along with financial penalties for divorce, create a lot of antinatalist incentives. And if these were really dealt with, would the birth rate just bounce back in a meaningful way?
So I take the perspective that it is 100% cultural. And by this, what I mean is, let's look at something like the high cost of housing, right? Historically, there have been different cultural norms around what a housing situation looks like. Like if you go back to like Irish immigrants in Manhattan, you'd have like 4 families to a house with like 12 kids all sleeping in one room. If you look at the house that I live in, which was built in the 1700s, just my family lives here and it's a moderate sized home, but you can still see divisions from when this house was divided between 4 different families, all with kids and stuff like that, And so I think that it takes something like the college, people are like, well, college costs so much and then you can't start having kids until after college. It's like, well, we used to have kids before you go to college. Like you get pregnant after high school and then go to college. And as my wife always says, college is a great place to raise kids because, you have less demands on your time. You're not going to get as sucked into like the negative cultural stuff if you're doing with kids. We don't have kids during that time anymore.
But even like my grandfather's generation, my dad was born when my grandpa was in medical school, not undergrad. I think like that was a pre-World War II thing, right?
Yeah. If you go to the 1970s, the average age of first pregnancy was, I believe I'm remembering this correctly, 22. So this is the average age, which means a lot of people were having kids before this of first pregnancy. So this was fairly recent that this change happened really, really dramatically. And so I think with a lot of stuff, just prioritization. Are kids more important to you, certain comforts? Or are they not? And then the secondary thing is that I do think that kids are decreasing for an economic reason, but I don't think it's a modern economic reason. This problem came on people's radar in like the 1980s and 1970s. So a lot of people associate falling fertility rates with those eras. But in reality, fertility rates have been falling ever since the like 1800s, really ever since the Industrial Revolution. And the core thing that led to this fall in fertility rates and continues to is that before this fall happened, the more kids you had, the more money you had because kids could work on the farm, kids would go to the factory, and then it became the more kids you have, the less money you have, which is a huge economic inversion.
Yeah.
And we haven't really built the cultural technology to deal with that. Like kids are no longer a hedonistic boost either to people, so you really only have kids because some sort of like ideological externality, like religiosity.
So how do you explain then the fact that if you look at every developed country, because I want to strip out emerging markets for this analysis, with the one outlier being Israel, there's about a negative 0.4 R squared between housing costs of major job center metropolitan areas and birth rate in every developed economy. And if you look at income, for example, versus birth rates, like wages versus cost of living in all of these countries, it was the same pattern. Even within countries like the US, Dallas and Atlanta have the highest birth rates. I'm going to strip out Salt Lake because they have religious considerations here.
Yeah.
But Dallas and Atlanta have the highest birth rates because they have the highest salaries relative to cost of living, whereas Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York have by far the lowest. Like a lot of those cities have more dogs than children for this very reason. So if there isn't an economic component, why do you see this in the data?
Well, as I said, the economic component becomes relevant within the predominant cultural norms of our society. And so, I could look at the existing cultural norm of our society, which says, one room per kid, for example. A lot of people like actually believe you need one room per kid, which is just insane.
From a small family, like
Yeah, or at least have a different room for the kids, or this is normal culturally pretty much anywhere you go in the United States, which is why you see this correlation, because we're dealing with a shared culture. The reason why I say this is a cultural problem is because if I was going to solve one of those two problems, i.e., solve the housing market or get people to normalize to putting their kids all in one room, it's much easier for me to work on the second problem than it is for me to work on the first problem, especially when there's so many other motivations for people to fix the housing market and they still haven't fixed it.
yeah, but how much of it also, this kind of goes back to the social contract type of idea, is that we're both millennials. The 1990s was arguably the best time to be a child in modern world history. And a lot of people struggle nowadays on a real income basis, and also just due to other cultural, like perceived public safety and other quality of life issues that have declined really since the 1990s. And they don't want to provide a childhood worse than they had. And you've seen like eras such as the Great Depression and like the late Roman period where you had similar concerns that people had less kids because they didn't want to provide a childhood less worse than their own. How much of that has to deal with this?
I mean, that's a factor in there. I don't know if it's as big a factor as people make it out to be. I think it's sort of a post hoc justification, similar to like, I didn't have kids for the environment. I think that the question is why do people have kids, right? One reason is because they want little pets. Like, this is a terrible reason to have kids, but it is one reason people have kids. But people who have kids to modify their own happiness, they typically breed like way below replacement rate. And so they're not really relevant civilizationally speaking. The other major reason people have kids is because it's a cultural expectation of them, i.e. or because they want to continue a culture that they have pride in. These people who are having it because of like cultural commitment reasons or because they have pride in their identity, I don't actually think they see things as bleak as other people do. One of the interesting things about like my kids, right, is while it may have been great to be a millennial, like I also, when I was trying to get into college, I was dealing with like the most competitive college ecosystem in human history. When I was trying to get my first job, I was dealing with like the most competitive job market ever. When my kids are growing up, there's going to be major gluts in a lot of industries and a lot more people looking for competent young labor, which is going to put value on them. It's also going to be easier for them and my culture to replace my neighbor's culture when it is in active retreat. Like, I don't even need to fight them. There isn't even a conflict. All I need to do is breed, and eventually we replace them. So I think that I can have that sort of optimism for my kids. My wife and I, every day, we're just like, we live in an age of miracles. When I look at what AI can do, and I understand that people can be doomerist about some things in regards to kids, but I don't know if I would say that they actually have it worse than us. I built this app people can check out, Whizzling, spelled with a Z.ai. And it allows you, it's free to use for now. It allows you to like make your kids teddy bears, like talk to them, and then bring the conversation back to like educational topics. And I was just able to like put this together fairly inexpensively. And now my kids have talking teddy bears. Like, that's so effing cool. And I was just thinking, like even the things that I loved from my childhood, like getting to watch like G.I. Joe, Saturday mornings. Now, I don't show my kids like the new slop, but I show them like 1980s, like G.I. Joe and Magic School Bus. And we were able to get like a big projector pretty cheap. If I had known that I could sit down and watch like Saturday morning cartoons for like half a day on a giant projector on a weekend for a fraction of the cost of that little dinky TV I had growing up, I would have been flabbergasted.
I think I agree with you though on the fact that the new generation is going to have life a lot easier. There'll be a lot more houses, a lot more open college slots, a lot more open jobs, and a lot shortage of like competition, and especially among a higher intelligence level people or middle class.
Exactly. And that's the point that I really can't highlight enough for people. Like, you have a sane audience, so they're not going to when I point this out, but things like intelligence have a hereditary component to them and have a cultural component to them. And it is specifically the highest intelligence individuals, this isn't like, I'm not saying like by ethnicity or anything, I'm saying across ethnicities that are quickly deleting from the gene pool. So the number of people who are born to families with a high level of competency in things like engineering, a high level of agenticness, a high level of technical talent is going to be way smaller than even the general drop that we're seeing in the population.
Yeah, and the question really that I'm going to follow up with that is 2 points. One is look at the depression, the generation born in the depression, the silent generation. They are by far the most successful financial generation, even more so than the boomers in the history of the world, because this very phenomenon, a lot of people didn't have kids because they were basically in poverty because of the Great Depression. And they were able to catch the wave of the boomers behind them and profit off of it greatly. But speaking of cultural pressure to have kids, something that baffles me, I saw one of your videos about this, is Catholic culture. I'm from a Catholic family myself. I'm a practicing Catholic. I'm one of 5 children. And a lot of my cousins are from families of 3 to 4 kids themselves. And the way that you said, like, I look at Catholic European countries like Italy, Spain, Portugal, Austria, and they have Ireland, they have horribly low birth rates. And even this is a culture that is very pro-life and very big family focused, yet they still have the birth rate problem. How do you explain that?
So we know from the data what's going on with Catholic culture, and it's very interesting. First, if you go to the 1970s, Catholics had way more kids, like 1970s, than other cultural and religious groups. And then their fertility rate basically just crashed, like across Latin America. Even within the US, they have very low fertility rates. And the answer is, once Catholics are married, they have the same birth rate per year of, reproductive window of marriage of other conservative religious groups. But Catholics get married way later than other conservative Christian groups. And we actually see this when I think about like Catholic conservative influencers who I'm aware of. I don't think any of them are married. Like Pearlie Davis isn't married. Nick Fuentes isn't married. I can't say I don't know that many.
Your sound cut off for a second.
Oh, I don't know. Are you married?
No, I'm not yet, but that might change soon.
Hopefully, yeah. And so the question then becomes, why do Catholics get married later than other groups? And I can come up with a lot of hypotheses around why this may be. I suspect it is because they look for more perfect partners, and they sort of are less impulsive and compromising in the partners that they choose. And this could lead to them getting married later. Sort of a belief like, if I follow the system, the partner will come, instead of the sort of hillbilly, like, I just have to make this happen. That could be it. Then there's the wider theory we have, which is if you look within cultural traditions, like if I go to Mormon groups and I look at Mormon groups that are low and high fertility, the thing that seems to track with lower fertility is a deontological approach to ethics, whereas a consequentialist approach to ethics seems to lead to higher fertility. And with Catholic groups, typically what I see is the high fertility Catholic groups have a strong cultural tie to Catholicism, but not a strong deontological tie to Catholicism. So these would be people.
Interesting, because like most of the Catholics I know here in California have a more worldview.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So for people who don't know what I'm saying here, so if you look at a Catholic who's like really high fertility, who's an influencer, I'm thinking about an individual like Domestic Terrorist is what she's called, but I forget that's the book that she wrote. Domestic Terrorist. It's a funny title. It's about, the fact that living a domestic life is basically, we've had her on our show, but her ties to Catholicism are much more focused around the community and the vibe and the feel, and much less focused on all the rules. And it appears what happened in Catholicism is that Catholicism used to motivate a higher fertility rate than other religious traditions through implementing a lot of strict rules that increased the number of what we call providential concessions. So this would be things like pornography bans, masturbation bans, no sex outside of marriage, no abortion, etc. And historically, this motivated people to get married earlier and have more sex and have more kids. As education has increased, even within Catholic families that follow all the rules now, almost none of them are having kids accidentally. I don't think I know any Catholics, like even they know their cycles very well. They know their systems very well. When they have a kid, it's because they've intentionally chosen to have a kid.
Sometimes they have an additional kid, like the youngest one might be like, you don't have a first kid by accident.
Yeah. And this, as a result, means that they're dealing with sort of this cultural operating system which is really, really heavy, but not necessary to motivate what it was intended to originally motivate. That's what I think is probably one of the main things. And then the other thing, like, why is Southern Europe, despite being poorer, lower fertility than Northern Europe, when typically the poorer country has the higher fertility is? One of the big studies done by Arya Babu that I find really compelling is that Southern European cultures are more misogynistic, and misogyny within Europe tracks to lower fertility rates. I'm not saying like Catholicism is intrinsically misogynistic, because I don't think it is. But I think that there has been a correlation if I look at like Latin culture and Southern European cultures that happen to have more expectations of the woman within a relationship. And this is leading in part to lower fertility rates, because now these women are still expected to go out there and work and do all these other things. And it's not a system that's conducive to women wanting to have lots of kids.
But how much of that is simply just those Southern European countries are above like the GDP per capita threshold to be developed countries and have sufficient education rates, but incomes go down? Like I've seen a smile
Could be
in terms of the fertility curve. And in fact, the smile's more becoming just a right leaning asymptotic curve where like lower income people just don't have kids, and the birth rates go up drastically above like 300 to 500,000 USD a year.
When you get super poor. Yeah, I mean, that actually seems to be...
I think the main decline of the birth rate, a lot of it is due to, like you said, the elimination of teen pregnancies, but also the super poor birth rate dropping.
Yeah.
They are the only ones really having like 4+ kids now.
So, I mean, that is a good point. And I'm trying to think through the more recent data I've seen, because it's been a while since I like made up my mind on this, but you may be right about that being a major factor there. One of the things that he noted there, which just is important to draw attention to, almost all of the collapse in the birth rate comes from young pregnancies. If you divide women by age cohort in the United States, it is only women under 24 where fertility rates have dropped. Above that age range, within every female age cohort, they've either stayed stable or gone up. And it's women under 19 where the fertility rate has absolutely plummeted.
Is that really such a bad thing, though?
It's not a bad thing, but it reframes the problem of falling fertility rates, which is to say, if you're coming at the problem of fertility rates and you're saying, why can't we just do things the way we did it in like the 1970s, right? I have to then point out to you, I'm like, well, the way they kept fertility rates high in the 1970s was in part these teen pregnancies. So actually, you need to motivate higher fertility rates than they had in the 1970s among this later fertility window, which sort of reframes the problem for me and is like, we need to create something new. I'm excited for that. You know, one of the things that I've been really trying to push within Catholic circles is the idea of pitching, because, you know, you've got a new pope now, you know, he wants to shake things up. New things are happening in the Vatican now.
American pope, like Trump's territory, even having a pope made in America.
Right. Yeah. To pitch some sort of new that sort of takes a Opus Dei mindset, but towards family life instead of work, you know, and dedicating yourself to the next generation. I think it's like a very Catholic thing to do. It would work really well. And when I talk with many of my young Catholic friends who are like super religious, they go like, I'm really struggling between the priesthood and becoming a dad. But like, I think that there's probably a way using like some of the concepts from the Opus Dei to split the difference.
All right. Interesting. Speaking of like Catholic families and housing and demographics, that actually leads to my next question. Boomers own about 55% of the housing market, depending on what age group you classify as a boomer. I've seen as low as 38. I've seen as high as 55. And about 2/3 of the housing market in general is owned by people above 55 years old. And my question really is, will the birth rate problem inherently just self-correct when housing prices reset as the boomer generation turns over? Because you're going to have overwhelming demand on this front pretty soon for the next decade.
This is something that it would seem intuitively would happen if you sort of look at this problem with Vaseline on the lens. Unfortunately, we've seen one of my favorite videos where we go over Detroit as a model for what's likely going to happen to the housing market. When houses move to an asset that everyone expects to lose value every year, and I know this is something we just haven't dealt with a world where
the only country that goes on right now.
Yeah, Japan, this happens too. But it's something that a lot of people haven't thought about. But when an asset loses value every year on average, the price of that asset crashes really, really quickly because nobody wants to hold that thing anymore. And then you deal with problems like you have in Detroit, where you have whole neighborhoods where like houses are selling for $1 and they're falling apart and everything like that. One of the problems with the way houses are made today is they actually cost a lot of money to keep up. We analyzed pictures of Detroit looking how quickly a modern house dissolves without maintenance. And they're typically rubble within about 12 years if they don't have somebody like living in them and maintaining them. And I forgot what it was, like the price of a house that goes into like yearly maintenance, but it's like a significant chunk, more
About
than
1 to 2% of the price of the house. Like
I can't remember exactly what it was. So I think what we're actually going to see is just a lot of houses collapse. And a lot of urban centers become incredibly like blight ridden and falling apart. I don't think what we're going to see is this utopia of cheap houses. But not that houses won't be cheap, but they won't be houses that you want to live in.
Yeah, but like in Japan, you've seen like a greater Tokyo houses and apartments be flat, even though it's still a nice city. Like, and Japan's birth rate bottomed about 15 years ago.
Well, but in the Japanese countryside, you have houses being given away for free.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, if you're like, well, then this should help. Like, if we lived in a country where houses were being given away for free, would a birth rate fix itself? You know, it hasn't fixed itself in Japan, and that's exactly the phenomenon they're dealing with.
Yeah, but it hasn't fixed itself somewhat. It's gone up from like 1.0 to 1.5 over the
I mean,
last
it's better than it used to be. Japan has the best fertility rate in East Asia that I'm aware of. I mean, except for like Malaysia, I want to say, but like if for like the wealthy countries in East Asia, it's doing really well compared to like China or Korea. So could housing be a factor there? Maybe. I mean, the Chinese housing market is terrible. So, that's a situation. But yeah, my general take on housing is I expect we're going to get a lot more urban blight and a lot less, utopia of cheap houses. And we might even see people change where they want to live. In Japan, what ended up happening is as the population collapsed, more and more people wanted to live in urban centers. My hope is that in America, the opposite happens.
I think naturally the American impulse is to move to suburbs.
Yeah.
50 years. People, I mean, this is where I fundamentally disagree with you. I think people don't want to raise kids in shoebox apartments, and that is stopping the birth rate. And the R square data, metro areas, and developed countries kind of confirm this to me. And also just my anecdotal experience dealing with my peers here, and particularly in California, who would love to have bigger families or a family, but they don't want to raise them in a small urban apartment. Or they move. Like, I'm from a high school, a class of 360 people, and over 90% of them have left California because they want to be able to buy a house and have a family.
Well, you're in good company with this opinion. Dan Hess agrees with you. This is his entire thesis. He's more burst on Twitter, a popular Twitter account, and he's been on our show a number of times. He's a demographer who I consider really smart in this area.
Yeah, the other thing is how much of the birth rate decline is really just the market response to excess labor supply. Real wages, especially if you use a more accurate number than the official government CPI, have declined consistently since 2000 among most education levels. And that could just simply indicate an oversupply of labor. In many metro areas, even since like 2010, 2011, the cost of living for a single person is often higher than the median wage. And I use Philadelphia as an example because that's like the median cost of living city. Like, the median cost of living as a single person to live by himself or herself in Philadelphia is higher than the median wage. And isn't that the market signaling that just we don't need any more people? Because
I mean, so I've talked a lot about why I think you have this divorce of like why median wages fell so much since like 1970, whatever. The core thesis we have here is it was mostly globalization, where a lot of these jobs were just being shipped overseas. And so because if you look at the decline in wages in the US, it correlates pretty strongly with the massive decline in global poverty all around the rest of the world. So that's
not entirely true, because the real decline was between 2000 and 2016. Like, real wages still, especially among more educated people, continued to go up.
I thought it was in the 1970s. Okay, well, if it is,
but like, no, that's when wages got divorced from productivity. So
okay, that's what I was talking about, is wages productivity divide.
But they still kept going up overall, really, until about like
you're talking about like total stagnation.
Yeah, total real.
Yeah. So my response,
and I think a lot of it to do with George W. Bush loosening the borders at that time and flooding increased immigration into the United States. But it also has to do just with, again, maybe globalization having a lag, because you saw under the first Trump administration, for the first time in like 15 years, you saw real wages go up. So, I mean, I think immigration might be a population size overall, or the millennials entering the workforce too. But I'm just trying to But I want to know what your take is. Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
my take on this point would be when I look at the individual decisions that go into individuals not having kids, I don't think that this is as big a factor as you seem to be indicating. What I mean by this is like the biggest problems in having a kid. Like if I was a person in our society today and I didn't find my wife and I was out there looking for a wife, first is incredibly hard to date. Like that to me is like a much bigger problem than any economic
How much of
issue.
that is just due to weakening men's economic power?
I think a lot of it is, but I don't think that men's economic power decreased because of market demand. I think it decreased because of artificial market manipulation to try to make men's and women's wages equal. But then women still want men who make more than them to marry. And it's like, well, you can't want equality in wages and then for most men to make more money than you. And so it's created a market dynamic where most, men are considered undesirable by most women. And then you get the problems of dating markets where women are beginning to judge their sort of value on marriage marketplaces by their value on sexual marketplaces because they're not told that like this is going to be different without realizing that on a sexual marketplace, a woman can typically get much higher quality men than they can to commit to them. And so there's all sorts of like things here in the dating space that are messed up. Even if you're just talking about like, I want a woman who shares my values. For every two conservative men, there's one conservative woman. Like that's really hard. So I think
How much
dating
of that is due
market
to the internet? Like, I
a
mean,
lot.
on the internet, you could find your own little niche community in anything, but they probably don't live in the same town as you. So it makes it
No.
harder for you. It makes you less willing to conform to your mainstream society, but it also at the same time makes it harder to find like-minded people because they're geographically spread out.
Whether it's like internet communities or the way online dating has made things harder or the way that sort of the new wage situation has made things harder. All of these are like new cultural and economic problems that I think need intentional cultural solutions to solve. And I don't think can easily be solved by something like government policy or let's just go back to the way we used to do things. Like we're dealing with a totally new set of problems.
Like just reducing the labor supply, like due to just boomers retiring or reducing immigration.
Well, I mean, I think those things would help, and I've been pro those things in the past. Fortunately, I think a lot of the immigration problem is going to solve itself because Latin American fertility rates have just absolutely collapsed. I'm pretty sure now half of Latin American countries are below the US and their TFR. And they're collapsing much faster than the United States in their CFR. So like Latin Americans are kind of going extinct, which is like this changes a lot of the math in terms of like what humanity's future looks like. Yeah, so much of this will just fix itself is I want to push back against it and say, well, here's why it's probably like we're going to be dealing with consequences of this before it fixes itself. I mean, look, it didn't fix itself in Japan. Like why? And you said it did kind of in Japan, but it didn't go, it's still, a big problem for them. But I also then have to temper myself and be like, force within the next 10 to 20 years. And like, is AI going to make 80% of the workforce irrelevant? And
Well, yeah, that's my follow-up question before we move on to the social class topic is when it comes to AI, like with being able to leverage AI, you don't need as much people. Like I run a business and even with pre-AI, like Web 2.0 type automation software, I'm able to reduce a company that historically would have required 10 plus people to less than 5. And as a company scales up, a company that used to have needed 100 people could probably be done with 10 now. So if people just are better at leveraging technology such as AI, and we can have a lot more quote unquote manpower with less people, does that mean that this birth rate thing is an issue, or it's actually the solution to the fact that you don't want a bunch of people born with no jobs or no opportunity?
I mean, this is something where I have to just say, like, it is very difficult. I can make educated guesses about the way AI is going to change things, but I think that we are at a turning point in human civilization that is not like there is no historical analogy to what's about. This is a bigger deal than the creation of the internet. I can only make educated, but the crazy thing about like any educated guess you make about how AI is going to change things is every single educated case I make is, and everything is going to be totally and fundamentally different than it's ever been historically. Like if you look at like the Whizzling product I was talking about earlier, the Whizzling.ai thing that's like a talking teddy bears for kids, like I was able to make that with like one guy. We have another thing, the Collins Institute people can check out, or Parasia.io, which is a Socratic education system tied with like a tech tree like you would see in Civ that we built to replace college for our kids because I didn't want to send them to college. Like I'm able to build all these things for my kids with like 2 to 3 people. You look at my podcast, the title cards are done by AI. The episodes, our editor is AI. The ideas and scripts are often partially generated by AI. Like before an episode, I can just go to AI, like I did an episode recently on ways that society was more. I'm able to just go to AI and be like, find me a list of all the different ways and then sources and then historical anecdotes. That would be like a writing team before. And so, you can look at the way that this is compressing work in my life and be like, yeah, but would you have really hired people to have those jobs historically? And it's like, yes, actually, we tried to make our YouTube channel work before. And we hired somebody else to do title cards. I hired, when I started my YouTube channel, restarted it this time, we had hired an external editing team. So these are people now who do not have work because of AI. But the thing is my title cards now are way better than they were when I had the external editing team. And my editing now is much better than it was when I had
I've noticed the same with my channel. Like my thumbnails are better, my editing is better, my sound quality is better. Then I would have had to hire audio engineers or video editors or artists to do all that stuff for me in the past.
Yeah, so it makes the very best of humanity significantly more productive. And as Brian Chow says, mid is over. It basically knocks out the mid players. And this is current AI. What makes it hard for me to predict where things are going to be in 10 or 20 years is, does AI eventually knock out even the very best of what humanity has to offer? And in that world, what does an economy look like? And that's probably for me, like when I'm raising my kids, the most difficult thing, because I can know like college probably doesn't matter. Like that's why we built a separate college system for them, because like college doesn't matter in the way it used to. But then other things are harder. What should they focus on learning? What should they focus on doing? If you had asked me naively, at the beginning of the AI revolution, and I told myself, well, AI is going to be able to do all these things that humans can do. And so what should your kids focus on? I was like, well, they should probably focus on the stuff that AI will never be good at, like art and music. And it's like, turns out that's the very first thing the AI got good at. So I would have made that bet wrong, So who am I